Well, greetings, fellow Polonians and friends, and welcome to our POSSE EDU webinar. I'm Dr. Gene Sokolowski, POSSE EDU president, and our topic is Frivolous Polish Complicity in the Holocaust. Now, by way of quick background, we at POSSE EDU are a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization, and our mission is to educate the American public accurately on key aspects of Polish and Polish-American history, culture, and relevant current events. Our guest is Mr. Jan Peczkis, whom many of you know for his insightful analyses of over 1,800 works by Jewish, Polish, and other authors on historical as well as contemporary Polish-Jewish interrelations. Jan's analyses of the Holocaust literature in particular reveal significant falsifications, misrepresentations, and material omissions about Poland and the Poles, which largely explains why Polish-Jewish relations remain problematic. So Jan, welcome, and thank you for being our guest speaker.
Good evening.
What I'll do now is for our viewers, I'll go now to the cover slide of Jan's presentation. If you will just bear with me 2 seconds, we'll get there. And here we go. So now, as you see here on Jan's cover slide, there are 3 URLs. The first is Jan's comprehensive online database website titled Jews and Poles Database. Jan's analyses of the many works he has reviewed are fully searchable by keyword phrase identifiers, as well as by author, book title, or year of publication. And his topic guide provides an extensive list of phrases, each of which directs viewers to the answers of many common questions related to Polish-Jewish relations. The second website, titled Justice for Polish Victims of the Second World War, provides comprehensive information on this topic under various categories, and it does so in a visually oriented format. And the third URL, you can view all of our webinars that have been posted to YouTube. And I'd like to just offer real quickly to save time, if you do have questions that arise during the webinar, email them to me and then I will relay them to Jan and we'll get the answers back to you. So our webinar procedure will be as follows. First, we'll show Jan's slide, and then second, while the slide is shown, I'll present one or more questions, and then third, Jan will address the question by discussing the slide or following slides in detail. So let's go to the first slide, Jan. Jewish efforts to control the Holocaust narrative are so extreme that they even impacted Poland's recent election of Karol Nawrocki as president. Now tell us how this actually occurred.
Okay, that's exactly what happened. A whole bunch of Jewish publications, a representative left one and a right one I have, and many other international publications have pretty much copied the same basic idea. The headline, Karol Nawrocki, right-wing Holocaust revisionist. Oh my goodness, it's a trigger word. Revisionist, it's an emotional term. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is something that the Jews don't like that's said about the Holocaust. Elected Polish president. Law and Justice promoted historical narratives about Polish victimhood and resistance to the Nazis. That's kind of a complaint. It's an ironic complaint precisely because the Jews are trying to bury the knowledge, public knowledge about Polish victimhood and resistance to the Nazis. All the more reasons the Poles have to keep talking about it. Here we go, the whoppers. While delegitimizing research on Polish anti-Semitism, that's a lie. It does no such things. There's tons and tons of books about Polish anti-Semitism on liberations. I know, I reviewed a whole bunch of them, and nobody's stopping the publication of more books on Polish anti-Semitism. By the way, they're all the same. They always blame everything on Poland. Or delegitimizing research on Poles who kill Jews. That's another lie. No such thing. There's no such hindrance. There's active scholars right now who are studying this from various points of view. I know. I cite some of them in my webinar today. Now, in 2018, Poland passed a law that forbade Poland as a whole being blamed for the Holocaust. Now, the Jews have been lying about it left and right. Tell a lie 1,000 times, somebody will believe it. So take it as a badge of honor that the law is attacked so much, that's a sign the Polish government finally did something right by passing this law. The lie they're saying is that it outlaws talking about Poles being complicit in the Holocaust. That's a lie. There's no such thing. It does not prevent any kind of research on Poles, individual Poles involved in the Holocaust. So they changed their line and say, oh, it's a chilling effect. That's another lie. There's nothing about this that chills anybody. I don't know a single legitimate Holocaust scholar who's been chilled or denied an opportunity to study Poles being involved in the Holocaust because of that law. And here comes the word, complicity in the Holocaust, complicity in Nazi crimes. That's another trigger word, an emotional word. That's why my title is Frivolous Polish Complicity in the Holocaust. That has two meanings. One, the accusation, frivolous, it means nothing. And second, actual involvement in the Holocaust, negligible. So two-way, it's frivolous. Now, what is complicity in the Holocaust? Is it only Hitler, only German people, excuse me, only all Europeans, or all of humanity? It can mean anything, so it means nothing. And who exactly is complicit in the Holocaust? You have a waitress that serves coffee to a Nazi. Does that make her complicit in the Holocaust? Who knows? It could. The Jews make complicit in the Holocaust a magic word, a trigger word, an emotional word that can mean anything and everything. It's a meaningless accusation. Enough said. Next slide.
Now, Jan, Germany's central role in the Holocaust has long been downplayed. Please tell us how the blame for the German-made Holocaust is gradually being transferred to Poles and other Central Europeans.
Okay, yes, I talked about this in some earlier webinars, and here's some more information in case it's needed. Ukrainian scholar Nakamowicz has come out. Germans want to redistribute blame for the Holocaust, push their role into the background, and shifting the main blame for anti-Jewish crimes on Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Polish, and other police subunits, as well as armed nationalist formations. Also, Latvian scholar Ezergelis has gone further. He's called it a Germanless Holocaust. As much as possible, remove the Germans to put the blame on the local peoples. Why do the Jews do it? Well, a couple of them. First thing, because the Germans paid them. Remember, previous webinar I said how the Germans paid off the Jews. So Jews now return the favor by downplaying the German role. So they got to play up somebody else, put the blame on somebody else, the Central Europeans. And that's why also the Jews dichotomized between Germans and Nazis. Totally false dichotomy. Then, of course, had previous webinar on the Holocaust industry. The Jews have an interest for Poland being blamed for the Holocaust. Germany was guilty of the Holocaust. She paid. There's nothing to be gained by beating up on Germany anymore. So you beat up on other people you want money from. They want money from the Poles, so they got to blame Poles for the Holocaust. And it's even more basic than that. Jews can make a bigger splash as victims. It's a bigger Jewish victim card when they put the blame on other people and not only on Germany and Austria. It's no more complicated than that. Next slide.
So the phrase complicity in the Holocaust, quote unquote, is such a buzzword. It's such a popular phrase. So in the next 4 slides, show us how the alleged Polish complicity in the Holocaust has been made into a propaganda tool by the Holocaust establishment.
Okay, I do a lot of reading, and this caught me flat-footed. Suddenly there came out a whole bunch of reports saying that 200,000 Jews were killed by Poles under the German occupation. Poles acting on their own, independent of the Germans, mostly in rural areas, killed 200,000 Jews. I didn't see it coming. Where did all this come from? So I started reading in detail. There's not a shred of evidence behind it. No archival studies, no statistics, no surveys, nothing. It is a purely made up number. It's covered in a lot of papers and articles and books, countless places. It is pure propaganda, pure and simple. And I remembered the Germans this is some very old propaganda technique, horror propaganda, Grell propaganda, fantastic atrocity stories. That's exactly what it is. The Germans used to do it. Germans used to say 3 million German civilians were killed by Allied bombing. That's 10 times too many. The actual total was actually 300,000. Then I realized something else. Wait a minute. The Jews have tried this trick on us before, 100 years ago, when Polish nation was just resurrected. The Jews began a huge newspaper propaganda campaign saying there was massive pogroms in Poland where upwards of 30,000 Jews were murdered by Poles. A whole bunch of prominent Jews said, see, that proves Poland does not deserve a nation. Poles are so backwards and barbaric that they don't deserve a nation. That's the whole idea of the propaganda, to delegitimize the Polish nation. There and now, President Wilson was outraged. He sent Henry Morgenthau, a top American Jew, to Poland to talk to various people unhindered. And Morgenthau has established that this is a total lie, totally pulled out of the cloth, no basis of fact at all. He came to America and a whole bunch of Jews practically crushed him. They couldn't stand that their lie had been punctured. And what else? And what's more, as Morgenthau got to know both Poles and Jews, he concluded that both Poles and Jews are at fault for the fact that Polish-Jewish relations are not better than they are. And the Jews hated that. That doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is that the Jews are just victims. Jews never do anything wrong. Everything has to be the fault of the Poles. That's always been. They hated Morgenthau, and they showed it. Now, this brings up other things at all. What Jews get when they lie like this. Unfortunately, Jews for many centuries have had a reputation of being chronic liars. We think of Goebbels. He said, a Jew can look you right in the eyes and tell you the most dastardly lie and expect to be taken fully seriously. Nowadays, there's even a saying, fish swim, birds fly, and Jews lie. So the Jews are giving ammunition to the anti-Semites when they tell these kinds of lies, and Jews are acting like their own worst caricatures when they say such lies, but they continue doing it. Well, why do they do it? Well, obviously political advantage of one kind or another. They know very well that a lie travels halfway around the world while truth is putting its shoes on. And by the time, even if there's an effective Polish rebuttal, by then the damage has already been done. It doesn't matter. Then because Jews dominate the narrative on the Holocaust, they know the Polish voice will get, at best, will get only a tiny hearing compared with the Jewish voice. And most Americans will believe the Jews by default because the Jews dominate the moral high ground of the Holocaust. And the Jews surely know that. There are a fair number of good Polish rebuttals to these lies, but they have very little impact in academia and almost no impact on the media. So the Jews lie because they can get away with it. They know they can hide behind academic freedom and freedom of the press. That normally journalists and academics cannot be prosecuted for slander. They normally cannot be sued for slander. They're protected, so they can get away with these things. And of course, the Jews know it. Finally, the Jews know that Poles are too weak to retaliate if they wanted to, too weak to retaliate effectively. Imagine what would have to be done if the Poles had the power to do it. They could force a congressional investigation on Jewish lies about Poland. Better yet, I would like, just because cigarette companies had to do, I would like the Jews to be forced to take out ads in newspapers, major publications, online, everywhere, admitting that they lied, admitting that the 200,000 figure is a total made-up horror story, and finally, to admit that the Jews used the standing of the Holocaust and the moral prestige of the Holocaust in order to press their lies about Poland. That would be a measure of justice. But of course, this will never happen. The Jews know it. Time will pass and the Jews will tell more lies about Poland. Until we change things, nothing's going to change, unfortunately. Next slide. Okay, now, it's long been known Poland has a reputation of being a land without a Quisling, without a collaborationist government. In recent years, Poles have brought this up, and the Jews and some other scholars have tried to discount it as, well, yeah, Poland had no Quisling because the Germans never wanted a Polish Quisling. That's a lie. There's a whole bunch of prospective Polish Quislings that never worked out, Now, In fact, the Germans wanted a Quisling. They told the Poles face reality and submit message that, look, England's not going to save you. Poland is defeated. Germany's going to win the war. If you're going to have any kind of voice at all, you got to have a Quisling government, face reality and submit. That came very useful. Years later, the communists did the same thing. The Soviet forced government, puppet government on Poland. Look, communism is the wave of the future. Communism is inevitable. Face reality and submit. And then in more recent times, that came into use again, that message that joining the European Union, a united Europe is inevitable. Face reality and submit. Same thing. Then as an addendum to this lie, we come up with a narrative that the Germans wouldn't give Poland a Quisling because government because Poles were too far below Germans. That's another lie. It's not based on merit. It's based on what the Germans can work out and what they want to do. It's not based on merit of the conquered people. In Belarus, there was a Quisling of sort, and the Belarusians are even below the Poles in German thinking. So that's not true either. So Poland's critics changed their lie against it. All right, so there was no Quisling. There could have been one, but there's lots and lots of Polish collaborators at the lower level. That's another lie. Post-war trials, only 0.1% of all Poles were tried with for collaboration, similar or even below to that of other people. So Poland is not a land of Nazi collaborators, contrary to Jewish lies about this matter. Next slide. Okay. Another constellation of lies deals with the fate of the Jews that escaped the ghettos and escaped into the rural areas and forests. The ruling lie is that there were practically no Germans in the rural areas. The Jews were totally at the mercy of the Poles, and the Poles saw to it and organized and individuals that they slaughtered Jews like the second Holocaust. The Germans had their Holocaust, driving the Jews from the ghettos to the gas chambers of the death camps. And in the rural areas, there was a completely different Holocaust. The Germans were absent, and the Poles were just there and killed Jews whenever they wanted and killed an awful lot of them. Now, that's another lie. What actually happened, the Germans were very much present in rural areas. The larger towns and villages had gendarmes, the German military police. The gendarmes were the principal executioners of the Jews caught in forest hideouts, arrested during patrolling of villages and roads, etc. So the Germans there were the main killers of escaped Jews in the rural areas. On top of that, these gendarmes were probably as bad as the SS. Fanatical Jew killers, their attachment to Nazi ideology, their contempt for everything non-German, brutality, contempt for human life. Yes, oh yes, pretty graphic right there. Okay, very important. Most of these killings have committed by gendarmes and were not recorded in documents. So we don't know how many killings were done by Poles, how many were done by German gendarmes. We know a majority were done by German gendarmes. We don't know how big the majority is. So you see, because the Jews tell lies about Poland, it's all the more reason we should hold them to a strict burden of proof. And this is a burden of proof they cannot meet because these are not recorded in documents. We don't know the full extent of how many fugitive Jews were killed by Germans. So Jews should be forced to withdraw these lies, to take out ads in the papers and other places saying that it's been established the majority of Jews in rural areas were killed by the Germans and not by the Poles. And furthermore, that there's no way of possibly proving that the majority of killings were in rural areas, fugitive Jews were done by Poles. They cannot meet the burden of proof. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The Jews have to admit their lies. They have to be forced to admit their lies about this subject. Now, often we hear the idea, well, you had Jews in the hiding out in bunkers and other places like that, and Jews were totally defenseless, bunkers and forests, and the Germans needed Polish collaborators to come along and find these bunkers. That's bunk for the most part. The Germans alone found bunkers very easily. Germans had patrols, they had dogs with them. A dog could usually sniff out a bunker within half a mile or more, sometimes a lot more, from where the German was at that time, no matter how well disguised that bunker was. And what's more, there was a domino effect. See, Jews who are hiding in forest bunkers appear to have been particularly prone to German police attempts to extract information regarding the whereabouts of other bunkers or local providers of food. When the Germans uncovered a bunker, the Jews just come out pleading that begging the German to spare his life in exchange for him telling the Germans where the other bunker was. Or the German first cynically offered to spare the Jew's life if he will tell him where the other Jewish bunkers are. But of course, the Germans later killed them anyway, with some exceptions, which they made recruited into Gestapo agents or things like that. But so you have a domino effect of one bunker found that exposed other bunkers, and still other bunkers, one after another. So a large number of fugitive Jews can be found in the forests, in bunkers, no matter how well disguised they are, with minimal involvement of any Polish collaborators. What's more, they used it to also find out who helped them, which caused reprisals to be made against Poles. More on this shortly. Next. Okay, lately there's been, especially lately, leftists and some Jews have alleged, kind of lumped everything on that nationalists, fascists, and Nazis, they're all pretty much the same, at least towards Jews, and that's also absolutely false. Even in the context of fascism and Nazi, for example, Italian fascism used to tolerate Jews for a long time, but was influenced by German Nazism. There was even Jewish members of the Italian Fascist Party. Same, believe it or not, the Dutch Nazi Party had Jewish members for a long time. So they're not all this, even then, at that level, they're fascists and Nazis, they're not all the same, let alone nationalists. So they changed their argument. They say, well, even though Poles did a fantastic job fighting the Germans, when it came to the Jews, there was a narrow footbridge connecting Polish nationalists and Nazi Germans against Jews. That's an absolute lie. It was, if anything, it was just the opposite. For example, Leon Nawrocki. The Nazis told him to remove all the Jewish lawyers, and he said, without hesitation, if such a need arises in a free Poland, we ourselves will remove Jews from among our lawyers. But as long as this is a proposal from an occupant, then not only won't we do this, but we will fight against the removal of our our Jewish colleagues. See? So he's saying clearly, no, Poles will form their own policies relative to Jews, but no, Poles will not do it. Poles will not obey the Nazis, and Poles will not imitate the Nazis. Now, the next question arises, of course, well, it's still discrimination against the Jews. Is that right? How can that be right? Well, that's a separate question. You can have discrimination against the Jews, yeah. You have discrimination against white people at 21st century America, so-called affirmative action, discrimination against white, wokeness, and DEI, and all that stuff. Either they're both immoral or they're both moral. You can't have it both ways. Either discrimination is always wrong or it's not. Okay, basically the same idea, the idea that white people have unfair advantages. For example, a white family is much more likely to prepare their child for the university to become a lawyer than, say, a black family. And this continues generation after generation. This is self-perpetuating inequity. And of course, the same thing could be said about Jews, because the Jews deal with finance, they're allowed into academics. So on average, a Jewish family is much more capable of preparing their child for the university to become a lawyer than a German family or a Polish family. It's the same basic idea of privilege. Okay, next.
Now, Jan, with the Polish Blue Police, which, as we know, the occupying Germans forcibly set up, they've been maligned as a collaborationist police, the same as in other German-occupied countries. Tell us why this accusation is incorrect.
Okay, certainly. Okay, first of all, they're not all the same. The French, Ukrainian, Belarusian police under German rule, they're mostly voluntary. The Polish police was conscripted from the pre-war criminal Polish police. The Germans conscripted the forced them to take part. There was even a threat of arrest of family members for desertion. So essentially, they were hostages. Now, the other police, you have some form of autonomy. The Polish police did not have any autonomy. They were purely order fulfillers. Moreover, the blue police was under Volksdeutsche command. Those were the ones, those were Polish-speaking Germans. They knew all Polish language. They knew various Polish ways. Those were the worst Germans. The ones who were citizens of pre-war Poland, which spoke Polish, and they led in German commands. Now, even to the Germans, the police were not all the same. For example, in the death camps like Treblinka, there were Ukrainian and Lithuanian police, but not Poles. They did not use the Poles for that purpose. So obviously, the Germans did not see the Poles as being one, and Poles and Lithuanians, Ukrainians being one and the same in this regard. Now, sometimes the Polish blue police was used to round up Jews on the trains to the death camps, but the Poles were not supposed to know why they were loaded, what their destination was, or what was going to happen to these Jews. Once the trains got closer to Treblinka, the Germans removed the blue police and they put in Ukrainian and Baltic police. So obviously the Germans had an interest for the Polish police not knowing that loading the Jews on the trains is tantamount to sending them to their deaths, while they had no such problem with the Ukrainian and Baltic police knowing all about it and even participating in Treblinka and in other places. During the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, the Germans used the Ukrainian and the Baltic police to help them suppress the uprising, whereas the blue police was only symbolically relegated to the peripheral guarding of the Warsaw Ghetto. So obviously to the Germans, these police forces were not all the same. To the Germans, the Polish blue police cannot in any sense be relied on to do the same kind of work as the Ukrainian and the Baltic police in killing Jews. Finally, we consider there's very few Ukrainians and Baltics native to the areas of central Poland. Why did the Germans waste their time bringing Ukrainians and Baltics police from hundreds of miles away? If Poles were such eager Jew killers, it should have been very easy for the Germans to find very willing Poles willing to help kill Jews, but of course they didn't. Now, of course, there were individual blue police who did collaborate, maybe only about 4%. The Jews zero in on rare exceptions. They blow it out of proportion. They make mountains out of molehills. They blow it out of proportion. They crop out the rest and zero in on that. Like they do a Grabowski and Anglican misuse of the August trials, those trials of post-war collaborators. That's what the Jews do. Now, those blue police that collaborated, they went against Poles as well as Jews, but of course we never hear about that. It's only about the Jews. If a Jew suffers at the hands of a Pole, that's terrible, that's never forgotten. But if a Pole suffers at the hands of another Pole, that's nothing. That's how it is. Now, lately we've heard the term JUDENJAGD. In German, that means hunt for the Jews. Grabowski wrote a book that was titled board. Like, it is totally misleading. It is an Orwellian Holocaust term, a term intentionally intended to deceive the unsuspecting reader. Why? The Germans never used such a term. They never used the term Judenjagd. The Germans had no special term for hunting for Jews. Using, just like they didn't have a special term for hunting for Poles or Russians or anything like that. But this narrative has it that the Germans did use such a term, Judenjagd, so the Holocaust seems more special than it really was. On the other hand, this has further Orwellian misleading connotations. You hear the word hunt, what do you think for? Think of a hunt for animals is a social event. The men are not just going out to shoot animals. The men are a form of friendship, a camaraderie. It's a social event. The men are partners with each other going on the hunt. So the term Judenjagd is a lie. It is doubly misleading because it implies that Poles and Germans were on the same side. Poles and Germans were buddies when it came to searching for the Jews. Poles and Germans were a camaraderie, as they were in a camaraderie when they were searching for Jews. That's a lie. The Poles were forced to take part in these searches for the Jews, just like they were used to do hunts against fellow villagers, Polish villagers, evading forced labor in Germany. So yes, the Germans did use Poles against their will to hunt for Jews, just like they used Poles to hunt for other Poles against their will. So it's not a Judenjagd in any sense of the word. It's a total lie, an Orwellian term. Now, there's also a German outfit called the Baudienst. Baud is a German word for construction battalion. The Poles joined this voluntarily so they could make a little bit of money. But once they were in there, they were not allowed to leave. Later, the Germans used the Baudienst to hunt for the Jews. So the Poles, and that Poles were accused of, Grabowski accused Poles of collaboration because they joined the Baudienst, which is another lie. The Poles did not join the Baudienst in order to kill Jews. They joined the Baudienst in order to take part in construction and make a little money. So the Poles joined voluntarily, but under false pretenses. The Poles were not allowed to leave. They were not collaborating. Now, that itself can be turned around. Germans obviously used deception to get Poles to kill Jews. If Poles were such eager, willing killers of Jews, just like the Holocaust establishment says, then there would be no need to use such trickery. The Germans could just call for volunteers, and Poles would be practically tripping over themselves in order to line up to volunteer to help in the killing of Jews. No pretense would be necessary, but obviously there was. So the Germans realized that as a whole, Poles are not willing to join in the killing of Jews, contrary to these lies by the Holocaust establishment. Next.
Yes, this one here. Why is it categorically untrue that Poles were the ones who killed most of the fugitive Jews that had escaped the ghettos?
Okay, this is again the same narrative, the lie about 200,000 fugitive Jews killed by Poles in rural areas, that the Poles were on their own. Germans didn't go there. Jews were totally at the mercy of the Poles, and all that's a total lie. The archival information, actually recorded instances and archives, have only 3,000 Jews killed by Poles under various conditions, can be considered reliably authenticated on the basis of it, according to Yad Vashem archivist Shmuel Krakowski. Now, Krakowski was not trying to make the Poles look good with a tiny 3,000 figure. No, Shmuel Krakowski was a communist, and he was in the security forces, worst of all against Poles, for a long time before he became an archivist. This 3,000 figure lumps both justified and unjustified killings, which I will get to in a moment. More recently, Poland's chief rabbi, Michael Shudrick, said no more than 2,500 Jews died at the hands of the Poles during the Holocaust or immediately after it. You can look up Shudrick and 2,500 in Google. Again, this lumps both justified and unjustified killings. Now, Barbara Engelking, who's been going around again with this, repeating this lie of 200,000 fugitive Jews killed by Poles, nevertheless admits the actual quoted figures are actually short of 5,000. This is that 2,500 from before. And additional unverified stories includes duplicate accounts, hearsay, community storytelling. Even then, it only rises to 5,000. So what do we have? There's a world of difference between 2,500, 5,000, and 200,000. 40 to 80 times as much. Now, of course, Jews have argued that these low figures, these are incomplete. Well, how incomplete are these? Is there actually 40 to 80 times as much, or maybe only at most twice as much when you count those that have never been reported? So, if that's the case, then you look at this figures, this 3,000 figure, you find that even here there's some duplication there. This indicates the data is already becoming saturated. And so the actual numbers, if all the data was available, would be maybe 70,000, twice as much, 7,500 would be 5,000 to 10,000. And that's it. Now, in case the Jews should have forced to have the burden of proof of proving that there is more, because the Jews have a long history of lying about these things, because the burden of proof should be on the accuser. If there's substantially larger figures than that, the Jews should have to be the ones that are forced with ironclad evidence to prove it. And until and unless they do, they should not be believed. So right now, we should stick to it that no more than 5,000, outside maybe 10,000 Jews were killed by Poles for any reason, justified as well as unjustified reasons. The 200,000 figure assumes they were all done by Poles and all done for unjustified reasons, which they most certainly were not. It's a collection of lies. Next.
So turning now to the media, we see that the media's portrayal of Poles as, quote, killers of Jews, unquote, differs greatly from reality. So in the next two slides, please show us in some detail how the media's propagandized accusation of 200,000 fugitive Jews killed by Poles is as fictional as it is malicious.
Okay, yes, most certainly. This is how it started. Grabowski assumed that 2.5 million Jews were still alive in early 1942. Of these, an arbitrary huge number, 10%, why not 9% or 11%? Neat number, 10% escaped from the ghetto. So at first, there was 250,000 fugitive Jews. Now, how many Jewish survivors? 40,000, say 50,000, okay? So that means that 200,000 all died, did not survive, those who escaped. These automatic huge red-brown oval that shows all those that were killed, huge number, and they're all killed by Poles. Presume that all the Poles killed all these 200,000 Jews. Jews killed by non-Poles are totally ignored, just as if they didn't exist. This also means that taken as face, for every Jew that survived, 4 times as many Jews did not. So they were killed by Poles. So the question is, how can Poles take credit for rescuing Jews? For every Jew they saved, they killed or denounced for other Jews. I mean, see, and that's where the lie comes from, with this constellation of lies. Lies on top of lies on top of lies. But even with this lie, there is an irony. If this lie was actually true, it would mean that only 20% of escaped Jews survived or so. Now, for a long time, Jews have been saying this propaganda, that another lie, that a Jew was just as much danger from a Pole as he was from a German. So a Jew who escaped was just as likely to die as a Jew just who stayed in the ghetto and minded his own business. That's another lie. Even if it's only 20% though escaped survived, this compares with the ghettos. All the ghettos were liquidated by the Germans, but some of the Jews were not killed. They were sent to concentration camps, labor camps. So overall, of Lodz ghetto, it's at least 5% of the Jews survived. So even here, 4 times, even in these worst case situations, 4 times as many Jews were saved, as opposed to those who just quietly obeyed the Germans, didn't revolt, didn't try to escape, just stayed with the Germans, kept their head low, and hoped for the best, you see. So total lie to say that a Jew was just as much danger from a Pole as he was from a German. A Jew who escaped was just as likely to die as a Jew who obeyed the Germans and stayed in the ghettos. Total lie. But that's what Barbara Engelking has recently repeated this lie that's been going on such a long time. The same lies keep coming up round and round and round. Okay, next slide. Let's look at the reality. Notice our circle is much smaller. The number of fugitive Jews was not 10%, that's 250,000, but it was actually less than 100,000. So, fugitive Jews, much less, not 200. So, right away, it means that the amount of survivors could have been as much as half. Half of fugitive Jews survived, compared with the 5% that stayed in the ghettos. Now, another thing is, The vast majority of fugitive Jews were killed by Germans, the gendarmes, the Volksdeutsche, Polish-speaking Ukrainians, others, and only a small fraction were killed by Poles. Notice how much smaller this red-brown circle is compared with the previous, fills the whole page. Much smaller circle, and only a small fraction can be assigned to Poles. Now, this is 2,500 to 5,000 Polish slave Jews. The vast majority died for just reasons, justifiable homicide, as I shall describe. Now, what about those that didn't? The larger brown circle would be like a Pole who killed a Jew, say, because he hates Jews, and that's the reason. That's a crime, but it's not necessarily part of the Holocaust itself. Just hating Jews and killing Jews because they're Jews by itself does not make you complicit in the Holocaust. It's only when it's done for Hitler, it's aligned with Hitler's specific goal of killing all European Jews. That's what the Holocaust is. It has a precise definition. The destruction of, one way or another, removal of all European Jews. Unless the Polish killer with Jews was specifically aligned with Hitler, he was not complicit in the Holocaust. This means instead of this medium brown circle, the darkest brown circle, that should be the only one which is the actual Polish role in the Holocaust. Killing Jews because you hate them, that's wrong, it's a crime, but it's not by itself part of the Holocaust. That's the larger brown circle. Smaller brown, darker brown circle that's specifically done for, that's the only one that's specific role in the Holocaust. It's a tiny fraction of the total 2,500 to 5,000 Pole slave Jews. Now, aren't we nitpicking and splitting hairs when we make this distinction? Not at all. Let us look at the law as an example. The law clearly differentiates between different kinds of killing of people: first-degree murder, second-degree murder, crimes of passion, crimes of revenge, etc., like that, manslaughter. The state of mind of the murderer and the motives of the murderer are important. So they should be here. Unless the motives are specifically for the Pole, a Pole with a motive, specifically helping Hitler destroy all of Europe's Jews, the Pole should not be recognized as involved in the Holocaust. Now, because the Jews lie all the time, they blame Poles all the time, and they try to fold everything into the Holocaust, to put the blame for the Holocaust on the Poles, that's all the more reason why we should fight harder and press harder for only this tiny, restricted, dark brown circle to be counted as actual Polish involvement in the Holocaust. Break this Jewish habit of expanding the Holocaust to be anything they want it to be and to blame Poles for it. Simple as that. Next slide.
So yeah, as we know, the Holocaust establishment falsely portrays Poles as voluntarily killing fugitive Jews. So in the next 3 slides, please explain how Poles were in fact forced to kill fugitive Jews, even when Germans were not present.
Absolutely. Okay, the idea is the Holocaust narratives are the Poles were free to do whatever they pleased in the rural areas. Poles living idyllic free lives, just as the Germans didn't exist, while the Jews were desperately trying to save themselves, and the cruel, sadistic, merciless Poles killed most of these Jews. That's the several layers of lies right there. To begin with, the Poles were in no sense free to act. The Germans set up a rigid village security system where the village head was in charge. The Poles are under constant pressure, under constant terror to fulfill German commands. First of all, human quotas for forced laborers. Poles had to be gathered and turned over to the Germans for forced labor. The Germans confiscated food, desperately needed food, the food quotas. Finally, the Germans forced the Poles to turn in any kind of fugitive from German justice, whether it was a Jew, a Soviet, or another Pole, a bandit, a stranger, anybody. So you see, the Poles were not picking on the Jews. The Poles were just forced to turn over any kind of fugitive. Jews along with the Soviets, prisoners of war, etc. The Poles were not free in any way, shape, or form. In addition to this, there was a problem of Jewish banditry. Lots of Jews escaped the ghettos. Instead of seeking help, they formed bands that robbed from Poles. Now, the Jews excused this by saying that, well, the Jews had to eat. Hello, the Poles also had to eat. Their food was being confiscated from them by the Germans. The Poles had to protect it. Anyway, during wartime, especially, banditry is commonly a capital crime. You find a bandit on your, identify a bandit on your property, you take an axe and you do him in. No questions asked. It's as simple as that. In addition, the fugitive Jews became a main part of the communist bands that were working to help the Soviets eventually impose a communist government on Poland. In fact, there's 3 volumes by Chodakevich that discuss this in detail. The Jews also helped in revolutionary banditry. That's an old communist technique. Banditry not to get supplies, but banditry to traumatize and terrorize the local population to submit to any government that will restore law and order. In this case, it will be a communist government. So Poles would beg for the communist government to restore order, traumatize the Poles to submit to the Soviet puppet government that's going to be forced on Poland. And the Jews played a leading part of it. And that's how they became further enemies of the Polish people. And that's why they were sometimes killed. Okay, next. We see also, we have a new argument that said, all right, so, the Jews just changed their lives. Said, all right, so Poles were forced with the Germans to hunt for the Jews and to turn in Jews. But the Jews, they made a new argument saying, well, there's also Poles who killed Jews when there were no Germans around. Therefore, the Poles were free to act. That's a lot of bunk. So Germans absent, Poles voluntarily killed Jews. Preposterous. The Poles were under rigid German command, even when the Germans weren't around. Just because the Germans are not there to use their eyes and ears doesn't mean they didn't have any. The Germans had their agent, V-Manner, including Jews, reported any fugitives to the Germans. Okay, so the message was obvious. Poles better obey whether the Germans are there or not, because the Germans are watching indirectly through their agents. And in addition, Germans had a long habit, even before the Holocaust, of taking Polish hostages to compliance. For example, if the Poles failed to turn in the food quotas, the hostage, as expected, the Pole would be shot. So the Poles were immediately traumatized and realized, and the same thing they did with fugitive Jews. Jews were not turned in, the fugitive could be shot. Better obey. The message is clear. As if that was not enough, the German terror was very immediate. It was not something that happened to somebody else far, far away. No, there was over 1,300 known rural locations where Germans shot, hanged, or burned Poles alive for any reason. No place in Poland was more than a few miles away from an active place where Germans had murdered Poles. The message again was clear. You better obey the Germans, whether you want to or not, whether the Germans are there physically or not. Okay, now, blackmail. We often hear about the Schmalzowniki. These are Poles who extorted money from Jews in exchange for not telling the Germans that they are Jews, okay? Give me all your money or I'll tell the Germans that you are a Jew, okay? All right, so they're like that. But it worked actually, we never hear about this. This actually worked both ways. Sometimes the Germans would have the Jews would blackmail Poles. If you don't help me, I'll go tell the Germans. They'll kill me, but then they'll kill you too. They'll believe that you did something for me, and they'll kill you too. Or other cases where Poles did help the Jews for a while, but the Poles ran out of supply, or so lost their nerves, and so they had a difficult choice, a choiceless choice. Either turn out those Jews and risk that the Jews will tell the Germans later who helped them, and then they'll both be killed, or the Poles had an incentive, very strong incentive, to kill these Jews rather than risk the possibility that these Jews will tell the Germans. So a fair number of Jews were killed by Poles as a preemptive act, okay? Preemptively killed to prevent them from telling the Germans who helped them. Okay, so sometimes it was done by the villagers themselves, and sometimes by the Polish police in the rural areas. They killed Jews so that they would not potentially tell the Germans, especially if the Jews bragged about it. Okay, hey, you don't help me, I'll go to the Germans and tell them, I will die, but so will you. There's a clear incentive there to kill these Jews rather than to let them act under threat. Other times, without threat, the mere situation was such that they were a security risk and they had to be killed. But of course, nowadays, this is all ignored and Poles are blamed for everything regarding killing Jews. Let's take a look at the village of Podboże. In Podboże, the Germans were looking for Paul that was hiding Jews. They didn't find him, so they burnt his house and they burnt most of the village too. Within a short time, villagers many miles around, like a radius, a circle, started turning on the Jews they had been helping. They either sent them out or they killed them preemptively, okay? So again, you don't need the Germans to be in every one of these villages in order for this to happen. The Poles acted on their own, acting on the news of the German threat and the imminent destruction of the village of Podboże. Then there was also the danger of German punitive expeditions. And sometimes the Germans would tell the Voits, the village heads, we know that there's Jews in your area. Take care of the Jews or we will take care of you. Visible threat. You either kill the Jews in your area or we will come and do it ourselves and we'll also kill some Poles as well. Or even without such a threat, that might be an idea. It's better to kill a few Jews or turn over a few Jews to the Germans to show that you're complying with them rather than risk the Germans getting their idea. There's a lot of Jews in the area who are not being fully cooperative with German orders. And then the Germans will come in a punitive expedition. They'll find and kill these Jews and more Jews as well. And they'll also kill a lot of Poles. They may burn some of the village. They may burn all of the village. Who knows? The Germans have no scruples. The Germans have no morals. There's no constraints on what the Germans will do. Poles are totally at the mercy of the Germans, and they must obey. Just because the Germans are not there physically, it doesn't mean that the Poles can ignore the Germans and pretend that they don't exist. But of course, the Holocaust materials never mention all this. It is purely voluntary killing of Jews, just as if the Germans were not there, just as if the Poles were living normal lives, just like nothing happened. And only, as always, only Jews are the victims and nobody else. Next slide. Okay, this takes a closer look at this problem of Jews who denounced their Polish benefactors. There's an order from the Armia Krajowa that said in one place, in Rzeszów region, there has not been a single incident in which a captured Jew did not denounce everyone who offered them help. In many cases, they maliciously gave surnames of individuals who were completely uninvolved. All are shot on the spot. We have borne many losses because of this. Therefore, I forbid any contact with and help to fugitive Jews. So there you have it, an actual document that realizes that the Jews usually tell the Germans to help them, and that Jews then become a major security risk. That's why they should not be helped. Or you could go further. In many cases, Poles are justified in killing these Jews as a security risk. It's either the life of the Pole or the life of the Jew. And that's in this wartime situation. That's what the choiceless choice, that's what the Poles were forced to go through. Jews were not the only ones who faced choiceless choices. That's all we hear about the Jews. Poles did also, but of course, we never hear about that. Instead, Poles are always blamed for everything. Okay, next.
Well, yeah, now we turn to the August 31, 1944 decree, which was issued under communist rule, and its purpose was it was aimed actually at punishing Polish collaborators of the Nazi Germans. So please illustrate for us how these August trials have been misused by the Holocaust establishment.
Okay, I'll give only a few examples because there's only so much time and so much room. First of all, Grabowski, Engelking, they talked about Fragner family, 7 Polish police and 1 German. So Poles are mostly guilty. Wrong. Omitted material fact, the German was a command. Guy who looked at the sources, another omitted material fact. Contradictory alternative version, only Germans shot all of the fragments. Poles had nothing to do with it. Then Grabowski and Engelking talk about Polish Schutzmannschaften, Polish collaborators, killing Jews. Wrong. They were Belarusian. And then the Węgrów ghetto, Polish police were accused of helping the Germans uncover Jews. That's a falsification. Guy looked at the sources and he found it was the Jewish police helping Germans uncover Jews, not the Poles. And the same falsification happened in Bochnia and other places as well. There was a village mayor who was accused of turning in 9 fugitive Jews to the Germans. Isn't that terrible? Wasn't it terrible? Omitted material fact. The village was regularly raided by bandits, including by Jewish bandits. Okay, the question of banditry again. But of course, we'll never hear about that. All we hear about is English-speaking leader will hear about Grabowski's and Engelking's lies. We'll never hear the true facts. Okay, for this reason, I propose, I know this will never happen, I propose, if you use archival material, it's got to be fully made available on the internet so everybody can see it. You can't have people looking into archives and claiming something that cannot be commonly verified and checked unless somebody travels there and looks into the archives. They must be widely available, or don't make any claims based on archives unless other scholars and other people can see the original sources themselves and make their own decision with what they say without this covert and lying, misrepresenting what the archives actually show. Now, there's also a few whoppers by Jews. I only give 2 examples. There was a couple of Jewish accusers who went around in the court of these trials, and these were communist trials, right? August 31st, 1944. These are trials of collaborators on communism, the way the communists called them. And they insisted they said that Poles killed Jews, and that they could actually identify the burial sites where these Jews are buried. Well, guess what? The Jews were sent there to show them what the places are, and given a couple of hours, they couldn't do it. So it sounds like they made the whole thing up. Then the Jews also framed the Fritzsch brothers for killing Jews, but there's several Jews, but they all made the same glaring error. They said that the Fritzsch brothers lives next to the Noretz River, but the Fritzsch brothers actually lived 2 kilometers from it. So it's the same glaring identical. So obviously there's collusion. They put up a story, they framed them, they made an accusation, and it fell apart when the lie came out. They made the exact same mistake. And we're supposed to believe all this? This is Holocaust scholarship? Nonsense, but that's what we do, unfortunately. Next.
Now, Jan, the Holocaust-related accusations always are one-sided, and it's the non-Jewish side that always seems to be at fault. Using the Lithuanians as an example, tell us how there can be a balance between Lithuanian wrongs to Jews and Jewish wrongs to Lithuanians.
Okay, all right. The Jews blamed the Lithuanians all for collaboration in the Holocaust. They commanded the Lithuanians to be always repented about, always ashamed of the role in the Holocaust and all that. And they even ordered Lithuanians to take down statues of Lithuanian heroes that may have collaborated with the Nazis, even if there's no proof that those Lithuanians were actually directly involved in killing Jews. Well, how many Lithuanians were involved? It turns out, first of all, the Lithuanians were offered a nucleus of an army that would fight against the Soviets. So that was an incentive to collaborate. It was not purely anti-Semitism and getting back at the Jews for collaborating with communism. It was promised it was a German offer for form an army out of these collaborators, which didn't happen. All right. There's 2.57 million Lithuanians. Even on these figures, the Jewish figure 15,000, Lithuanian with 23,000, less than 1% of Lithuanians were involved in this way with the Nazis. Either as administrators, those who actually killed Jews, only 2,000 to 3,000 active police that shot Jews alongside the Germans or on their own. You know, this is ironic, less than 1%. Now, Jews always make the excuse, you can't blame Jews for communism because only 1% of Jews were communists. If it's that low, but you see 1%, only 1% of Lithuanians were involved. So I would say, yeah, we got to change. We have a right to do it. Since Jews blame Lithuanians, even though only 1% were involved in the Holocaust, we should blame the Jews collectively for communism, even if it's really true that only 1% of Jews were actually communists. Equal standards for all people. Next.
Now, Jan, and finally, we all know that the Holocaust establishment continually points fingers at Poles. And if I may use a colloquial expression, please illustrate for us how three fingers always point back at them.
Okay, let's look at the post-war situation. The communist security forces, 37% of the leadership was Jewish. In the first 3 years, 30,000 Poles were murdered by the communists. Now, assuming proportionate action, 37% of the killings of Poles were done by Jews, comes out to 11,000 Polish victims of Jews. Now, if Jewish communists were on average, twice as effective as the Polish communists, Stalin knew what he was doing. He was evil. He wasn't stupid. You know, Jews are very capable and very dedicated to communism. If Jews were twice as effective, then we 16,000 Poles that were killed by Jews. This dwarfs the proven amount of 2,500, 5,000 Jews killed by Poles. So in other words, Jews killed more Poles than Poles killed Jews. But of course, we never hear about it. I think we need to keep the Jews' feet to the fire and make them admit their crimes. I would go as far as say we should not admit any crimes at all, even if they are true, until the Jews start admitting their crimes against us. Otherwise, nothing will ever change. Jews will always bring up new accusations against Poles, and Jews will never admit any crimes that they made against Poles. We got to put a stop to this, finally. Now, if the Jews are going to argue that there was more than 5,000 Jews were killed by Poles, a huge burden of proof to do it, to prove that, especially they were lied before, and so we demand proof. Just like the boy who cried wolf. We may believe him, but he must photograph the wolf first to prove to the villagers that there really is a wolf before we believe him. Okay, that concludes my presentation. Cześć wielkiej Polsce. Hail great
Okay, Jan, I'm
Poland.
going to make some closing remarks here for our friends and viewers. As we come to a close on our webinar, we at POSSE EDU thank you for your interest in each of our webinars. And Jan, we thank you for explaining why the accusation of Polish complicity in Hitler's genocide of European Jews is false as well as preposterous. And with that, we thank our viewers for your interest, and we bid you all do widzenia and goodbye.
Good night. Good night.